All right, let's get underway. So welcome to today's webinar, Maximising Your Marketo and Salesforce Integration. So one of the biggest challenges of the pairing is that there's always sync issues, something doesn't work, there's a field that's missing. We'll aim to tackle some of those common challenges today as we go through this webinar. As ever, this will be a recorded session. It will last around 30 minutes. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end, and we will send the recording out after this webinar. And again, any questions that you've got, feel free to put them into the Q&A as we go through today's session. So I'm James Fletcher. I'm a Marketo Solutions Architect here at JTF Marketing. I'm going to take you through the agenda, which is going to look at some of the common issues surrounding Marketo and Salesforce Sync and how we can fix them or avoid them completely. We're also going to look at the power of custom objects and how we can utilize velocity scripting within Marketo in order to take that information out the deepest, darkest ends of Salesforce and bring it into our marketing campaigns. We'll also look at using Marketo programs and Salesforce campaigns. It's an area that we see not a lot of people use very well. So we'll dig a little deeper into that. And of course, any Q&A, any questions that you've got, I'll be happy to answer those at the end. And if we don't get time to answer them at the end, I will make sure that you get a response from someone on my team in order to answer your question. So if you're new to JTF Marketing, we've been around for about 8 years. We're focused purely on Marketo, so we help across not only the technical implementation of such platforms, but importantly, how do we scale it? How do we use it? How do we understand if we're getting value from that platform? And you'll see a couple of the names on the screen here, which are some of the global brands, as well as maybe some brands you've never even heard of. We work across multiple industries, which allows us to take a holistic view at the ecosystem as a whole and really dive into what is best practice, what does it look like, and how can we actually add in these extra bits of technology in order to scale what Marketo can possibly do. It does also mean we've had visibility of some of the biggest challenges in the Marketo space. So if you've got something that you can't get solved, I'd love to have the conversation because the team and I love a challenge. And we haven't come across anything yet where we've said, that's not going to be possible. So if you've got anything, I love a challenge. Feel free to send it through to us. So let's start with these common issues around Salesforce and Marketo. You probably recognize some of these statements on the screen. Maybe you've already experienced them. Maybe you have some of these issues already. And ultimately, when we look at the integration between Marketo and Salesforce, it's relatively simple. The connector, the native connector between Marketo and Salesforce is fully managed by Adobe these days. We've got a push and a pull mechanism, so anything that's changing in Salesforce will pull into Marketo, and equally anything that has changed in Marketo will push back into Salesforce and vice versa. So it's really important that we understand the architecture of that sync because it will allow us to basically understand what we can and can't do with the two systems. Now, when it comes to architecture of the two systems, it's completely different. From a very simplistic Marketo view, we've got the person object, company object, opportunity. We've got custom objects, which don't relate to Salesforce objects. And then we've got activity and so on, which is not important for this conversation. If we then look on the Salesforce side of things, you've got your leads, you've got your contacts, you've got your account, opportunity, events, activities, campaigns, you name it. There's lots of different objects. Plus, you can build your own custom objects in the structure that you want related to the different objects that you want. Now, the most common challenges come from dirty data, as well as permissions, and also the way that your Salesforce instance has potentially been architected. Now, I'm not going to say that that doesn't mean that you can't, or that means that you can't use the data. It just means we might have to think about it in a slightly different way. Now, the way that Marketo works is we use relationships within the Marketo database. So we're always looking at an individual who has an opportunity, who is a member of an account, who has a custom object, who may have a sales activity against them in Salesforce. Again, all that information is all attached to that one individual person. You can, of course, flip that around and say, show me any accounts with people who have these characteristics, of course. And that's obviously your smart list within Marketo. Now, because we rely on that relationship in order to especially send email, we can only really use the information in Salesforce that is linked to an individual. So if you have a custom object, for example, and it is a custom object related to an opportunity, let's take an example of an insurance company, and maybe they're using a policy object, which is attached to an opportunity, which is the numerical value, then unless that policy has an individual associated to it, within Marketo, we can't do very much with it. I'll come back to that at a later point and explain to you how we can actually use that. But it's really important to understand that architecture between the two systems and how it will possibly impact what you would like to achieve. Now, one of the things that comes up a lot, especially when you're doing a lot of data migrations, or you're maybe acquiring different businesses and integrating them into your Marketo system. Maybe you've just been to the largest exhibition of the year and you've just uploaded 10,000 names from the scanner that you've been scanning away for days, and they're not syncing, or something's failing, or something's not going quite right. Under your Salesforce tabs within the admin section, so if you go to admin, you then go to Salesforce on the second option, because there's Salesforce Object Sync, which is not the one, but on the Salesforce item, you can then look at the sync status. Now, what this will tell you is all of the different objects, and if I look at this column here, you can see the different objects that are pushing or pulling, and then whether it's been successful or not. Now, if you get any issues, you'll see what has actually happened each time this runs. Now, we know from a Marketo perspective, the sync runs every 15 minutes, and we can see that in the top right-hand corner. So what we're looking for is any sync issues that have happened in that last sync period that we should maybe be looking at. Now, you'll see a couple of different objects in here. You might not necessarily want to worry about those. You might want to be mainly worried about opportunity information because it changes your revenue model stage, or leads because it's actually pushing leads into the sales team. Again, we're just going to make sure that we're prioritizing the right things. Once we've got visibility of challenges, and we'll see there's a couple of different items here, right? We've got net new, either going in or out. We've got updated, we've updated a record. We've got deleted, so something's been deleted from either side. And then we've got failed, which means it's been unsuccessful and Marketo is going to stop retrying. And then you've got skipped, which is we've tried it, didn't work, or we can't find the place where it's meant to go, therefore there's a problem. Now, these are really important because it'll help you pinpoint where do you need to go and where do you look next. Now, for those of you eagle-eyed at the top, you can obviously look at the sync errors, which I'll come back to in a second. Now, there's something important here that you might not already know, which is this little notification bell in the top right-hand corner of your screen when you're logged in will show you all of the notifications that happen within your system. Now, I highly recommend you go through and register for as many as you would like, but definitely the CRM sync notification type. And you can set that up to an email address outside of Marketo as well. So maybe it's crmadmin@mycompany.com. They will then get the notifications as well. So you can start to see what is working and what is not working. Now, there's a bunch of other notifications in there that are pretty useful. So definitely look at what you may want to actually pull in as a notification. They come as emails. They will tell you the records that have been affected. And where I've blacked out this record for privacy, you will get a list of those records that you can then go through and click on and find out. Now, the important part here is you get the notification of, well, what went wrong, what happened, which again, you can actually see under the sync errors tab. So it depends on where you prefer to look. A notification into your inbox, which means you can go in and fix the problem, or a daily check into that sync errors log, whatever is easiest for you. Ultimately, this is probably the quickest way because you can see the records that have failed versus just the reason code. Now, what we can do here is actually go in and populate the last name and company name for these two records, which are mandatory fields for creating new leads in Salesforce, and then they will sync on the next 15-minute sync. So that's really important. Again, what you might find here is different error codes that are related to permissions as well. So if they do come up, the important thing is to go back into Salesforce and check the permission set that you've got and make sure that you've got edit all, delete all, and read-all access to all of those records that you want. If you've got different record types, you might need some additional help with that as well. Or if you want just a quick checkup, again, I'll be happy to get one of the team members here at JTF just to jump on the phone with you and sanity check what you've got and make sure that we've got the settings that we need. Now, the number one problem of any sync issue between Marketo and Salesforce is usually permissions related. So I do recommend that on a regular basis, even if it's annually, you book in that reminder and say, I've got to go back and check that nothing's changed. You'll be amazed at how often CRM fields change and how people miss stuff, or they don't add it to the Marketo sync profile, which is where you're going to need it to be. Here's some good tips on getting the right permissions on the objects that matters most. So we've got lead contact, account, opportunity. Now, there's something interesting from an account perspective is depending on your settings, you may not be allowed to edit any of your accounts. You're not going to potentially give it, modify all. What is useful to know is that we can't actually write to any opportunity object, and that does come up as a question quite often. So definitely make sure you get visibility of the opportunities that you need in order to progress people through your buying cycles. Make sure you're nurturing and personalizing correctly. Now, there is one thing to watch out for in Salesforce, which is validation rules. Because of the way the sync accesses Salesforce, it accesses it just like you or I would. So we're entering information, saving the record and leaving. Now, if you've got validation rules that is against every single user, which is the most common scenario in Salesforce, you may have blocked updates for that very reason. So if you've got a validation on phone number and the phone number is empty and you're trying to save, that's probably going to be the reason that it's happening. So often it can be useful if you can't get the lead to generate into your Salesforce instance, then try doing it manually. Does it work? What's the error code? Use the exact same information, and then you can work your way backwards. Again, you can put overrides in place for validation rules for specific users or profiles as well. So I definitely recommend reviewing that with your CRM admin or working with a consultant who can help you through those different steps. Now, I've talked a little bit already about custom objects in Marketo. Custom objects in Marketo are completely disassociated to anything else related in Salesforce, and they are pretty much unused in most organizations. Now, if you do start to use them, there is only one way that you can use them, which is velocity scripting. That's very similar in the context of Salesforce custom objects, because actually Salesforce objects need to be related to a person, much like a Marketo custom object, but both can only be used when using velocity scripting. So you need to have some level of scripting capabilities or be very good at using ChatGPT in order to write yourself a velocity script to pull those into the relevant emails. Now, you don't need to map Salesforce custom objects to Marketo objects. You can go in and enable them. So where you have the sync objects on the menu within the admin section, you can go in and look at the different objects and enable or disable them. You can actually also enable them to be filters or trigger fields, depending on what you want to do. So let's say you've got a custom object that says someone signed up for a trial account. You want to trigger an email based on that. You're going to need that object to sync across. You're going to need the relationship back to the individual. And you're also going to need to be able to have a trigger, which says has been created or is created, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little bit more complicated. It's definitely recommended you talk to a Marketo architect and not an expert, because not always have they had the experience of looking at these items. So definitely recommend just getting some advice before you make any changes, just to avoid any issues. Now, one of the things I'm sure you guys will know as well is when you create new fields in Marketo, they're a nightmare to delete, which is really annoying, but it is possible. So again, cleaning up those fields is really important. We do recommend creating yourself a glossary of the fields that are in Marketo. What is it? How are we using it? Where's the source information coming from? And is it a synced field into Salesforce? Ideally, you would try and keep everything synchronizing back to your CRM. Now, when we talk about campaign sync, there's obviously a couple of different ways to do this. You've got the overall program sync, which is what you see in the screenshot on the right-hand side. And then you've got the flow step, which allows you to synchronize to a campaign and add someone into a campaign. Now, there's a couple of interesting things here to take into account. The first thing is your channels and tags within Marketo. Now, channels and tags are the groupings or the reporting standard that you're using to compare like for like. All webinars the same, all training sessions the same, all signups the same, all downloads the same. And you may be changing the content on top of those, but you're looking at the conversions consistently. Now, if you are misaligned in your channels and tags, then you will probably get pretty bad reporting out of Marketo and complain and say it doesn't actually give me any insightful reporting. That's probably why. That's the place to go and look at first. And again, if you need some guidance, we've got some tools on the website in our resources section that you can look at to help you map some channels and tags as well. The second thing is, if you have a custom sync rule in place, you may not want to use a program sync, because what it's doing is basically pushing everybody who's a member of that program into Salesforce. So if you're trying to control the volume of contacts between the two systems, you're keeping marketing only leads in Marketo and only pushing over into Salesforce when they are sales ready, don't synchronize the program, please, because you will end up in a bit of a loop back and forth. What you have also got to think about is when we create a program in Marketo with specific channels and tags, and we want to push that into Marketo, we need the permission to create edit all on the Salesforce campaign side. If we don't have that, you're going to get issues synchronizing contacts into Salesforce. So if any of you are sitting there saying, that might be why that contact's missing or that lead's missing from my Salesforce dashboard, absolutely yes. So this is generally the issue when it comes to Salesforce campaigns, because we don't set up the permissions correctly. And so therefore we can't add people into different statuses. Marketo forces the channels and tag statuses into Salesforce. So you actually have to make sure they're right in Marketo before you go and do it in Salesforce. Then once you're creating new from Marketo into Salesforce, it's really easy. You don't have to do anything else. Now, a question that comes up time and time again is, how do you manage webinar series? And this is always well, what do you want to report on? Do you want to report on overall attendance to the series, or do you want to report on individual webinar performance? Now, from my perspective, I look at it and say, actually, the most interesting number for sales is the overall, who attended, who didn't, who watched on demand, etc., at a kind of umbrella level, at the series level. And this is something we do also for our online training program as well. So we have a kind of acquisition program, which is the series program, which synchronizes to Salesforce and contains everybody in it. And then in each individual webinar, which is hosting our training sessions, we don't need to know or roll those into Salesforce in order to create parent and child campaigns. It's not important. It's just creating more influenced campaigns within Salesforce, when actually all we want to see is, did they sign up for it? Did they pay for it? Great, let's go. Now, cost periods is something, again, that's not heavily used in Marketo, and it's really important. So if you want to see marketing return on investment within Marketo, not only in Salesforce, I recommend using cost periods. They can be added in the program itself under setup, and you enter the value and enter the month. Now, the way that this works is by using the success criteria of a program, which is part of the channels and tags. You can then start to see the results of each single campaign. So it's definitely worth making sure that you're populating that value, and that will push into Salesforce CRM as it's syncing. What it doesn't do, however, is pull down the budgets from Salesforce campaigns into Marketo. It would be a great add-on, and I pray that one day we'll get to that. So we've talked about sync errors. We've talked about fixing these common issues. We've also talked about those parent-child campaigns. And again, one of the things that's really important is to look at how can we use custom objects as well. Now, custom objects is a little bit fiddly, so I definitely recommend that we look at how can you get some support from people who know what they're doing in order to generate that correctly and make sure that you've got everything lined up. Now, One of the best examples that I've ever seen is this insurance organization. They basically had the policy object associated to the opportunity. It then had to have some roles created against it in order to allow it to be used. Again, that velocity scripting becomes really important as well in terms of getting that in place. Now, of course, we provide this information for free and to educate, to share information, but we do have experts on hand who are able to help you. We've also got training programs which are running online, virtual, or in-person workshops. We're also going to be starting some topic-specific workshops. So if you've got anything you would love to learn, I would love to hear from you and see what is it you would like to learn about. We can let you know whether we've got one of those sessions coming up. Otherwise, look out for an email from us promoting the little topic workshops coming up soon. Thank you very much for joining us for this 30-minute webinar. There will be more of them, so I'd love to hear from you if there's anything you would love us to cover, any topics that are dear to your hearts or problems. And again, look forward to seeing you on one of our future webinars. Thank you very much.